We've all been there, right? You send a text in the heat of the moment, or maybe snap at someone you care about and instantly regret it for the rest of your life. So, why do perfectly rational, intelligent people suddenly turn into uncontrollable monsters when pushed to the edge? Well, welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive right into the fascinating science behind the amygdala hijack and what's known as the 13-second rage rule. To figure this out, we really need to understand a psychological event called the emotional hijack. Think of your brain like a highly sophisticated TV, right? Normally, your logical, rational self is sitting there holding the remote control. But when a sudden, massive wave of intense emotion hits, whether it's profound shock, overwhelming guilt, or just paralyzing fear, that emotion violently snatches the remote control right out of your hands. You literally aren't the one making the choices anymore. In that single, critical second of overwhelming emotion, you make decisions based entirely on how you feel right in that moment, instead of reality. And by the time your logical brain finally finds the remote again, the damage is already done, and you're left with a lifetime of regret. See, there's this massive, fundamental mismatch between facts and feelings during a hijack. In those heated moments, we rarely act on pure reality. We act entirely on the feeling of the moment. And master manipulators, skilled negotiators, toxic individuals, they exploit this constantly. They don't actually want you to think about facts. They want to ignite your feelings, triggering fear, outrage, maybe extreme pride. Because once they bypass your logic and connect directly to your emotions, your judgment is completely compromised. When feelings override facts, the game is already over, and your mind is essentially under their control. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is, well, you probably think of yourself as a highly rational, thoughtful human being, right? Floating through life, making these well-calculated decisions. But leading neurologists reveal a truly shocking reality. We actually spend roughly 80% of our time completely controlled by our primitive limbic loop. Yeah, 80%. That means the vast majority of our actions, our reactions, our thoughts, and our self-doubts, they're being driven not by high-level logic, but by this ancient evolutionary survival loop that's just running silently in the background of our minds. Let's actually break down this biological battle going on inside our heads. On one side, we have the limbic system. You've probably heard it called the reptilian or mammalian brain. This thing acts like an ancient primitive scanner, constantly on the lookout for threats. Its default settings are what we call the 4 Fs: fight, flight, fear, and freeze. It's the source of your sudden anxiety and self-doubt. On the other side, though, we have the frontal cortex. This is your highly advanced logical command center, responsible for all the Cs: command, control, commitment, and choices. It's what lets you regulate your emotions, pause before reacting, and actually choose a thoughtful response over a destructive reaction. And this brilliantly illustrates just how much evolutionary power we actually have at our disposal. A rat's frontal cortex makes up just 7% of its brain. For chimpanzees, it's about 11%. But as humans, we've been gifted a massive 40% frontal cortex. We are biologically engineered with a huge command center specifically designed for emotional control and complex reasoning. And yet, despite having this massive evolutionary advantage, this incredible biological superpower, we still let that primitive reptilian brain win time and time again when we get triggered. So let me introduce you to the primary culprit behind our worst emotional outbursts, the amygdala. Deep inside your limbic system lives this tiny almond-shaped structure. Think of the amygdala as an overzealous security guard or a watchman. Its entire job is to constantly scan your environment, looking for absolutely anything that might hurt you, physically or emotionally. But here's the catch. When someone insults you, disrespects you, or even just cuts you off in traffic, this little watchman reacts exactly as if you're being chased by a hungry tiger. It screams threat and instantly throws your entire body into a state of panic or rage, completely locking out that beautiful 40% frontal cortex. So, the watchman sounds the alarm. But how fast does this actually happen? I want you to take a guess. When you read that infuriating text message or hear a sarcastic comment, exactly how long does it take for this tiny almond-shaped watchman to completely hijack your brain, lock away your logic, and turn you into a raging force of nature? The biological timeline from that initial trigger to a state of uncontrollable, blinding rage is astonishingly precise. 13 seconds. That's it. Neurologists have found that it takes exactly 13 seconds for the brain to convert a sudden emotional trigger into full-blown anger. From the moment the amygdala registers a threat to the moment your body is flooded with rage, you have a 13-second window. In those few seconds, a massive chemical reaction is surging through your brain, actively trying to sever your connection to logic.
If you react within those 13 seconds, you are acting purely on the amygdala's frantic, primitive orders.
But there is a massive silver lining here. As one leading neurologist points out, if you calm down for those 13 seconds, the power is just gone. This 13-second window of rage is incredibly intense, sure, but it is also extremely fragile. It's basically just a bubble. The chemicals causing this reaction have a very short half-life if they aren't continually fed by more angry thoughts. If you can simply hold out, remain totally still, and just not react for 13 seconds, the bubble pops. The anger dissipates, the amygdala loses its grip, and your massive 40% frontal cortex steps right back in to take command of the situation. Now, knowing about these 13 seconds is one thing, but actually surviving them in the heat of the moment, that's a whole different story. You literally cannot just think your way out of blinding rage. Remember, your logical brain is currently completely offline. To hijack the hijacker, you have to use a physiological reset. You have to change your physical body to force a change in your psychology. You essentially have to use biology to defeat biology. So, let's walk through the exact step-by-step biological hack designed to drain the power from the amygdala during those critical 13 seconds. Step 1, take a deep, deliberate breath, a cyclic sigh that fills your lungs completely. Step 2, as you hold it, immediately engage your logical brain by counting backwards from an obscure number, like 100, 99, 98. This simple math forces your frontal cortex to literally wake up. And step 3, exhale slowly and smoothly. This 3-step process is the ultimate emergency brake for your brain.
Why does this breathing and counting work so flawlessly? Because it forces your parasympathetic system and your vagus nerve to kick into gear. See, when the amygdala triggers rage, it uses the sympathetic nervous system to rev you up. But slow, deliberate exhales physically stimulate the vagus nerve, which runs straight from your brain right down to your abdomen. This sends an overriding biological signal to your brain that says, hey, we are safe. It instantly calms your heartbeat, stops your racing thoughts, and fundamentally shuts down that primitive fight, flight, fear, or freeze response. But what if the emotion overwhelming you isn't anger? What if the amygdala doesn't trigger rage, but instead triggers a sudden, paralyzing wave of nervousness, restlessness, or severe anxiety? The watchman is still screaming threat, but instead of wanting to fight, you desperately want to freeze or flee. The good news is, the underlying biological mechanism is exactly the same, which means we can use a very similar physiological tool to safely disarm it.
For anxiety, neurologists highly recommend the 4-7-8 breathing technique. Here is the specific breakdown. You inhale quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. You hold that breath for 7 seconds. And then you exhale slowly and completely through your nose for 8 seconds. Now, the magic here doesn't just lie in the deep breathing. It lies specifically in the ratio. Your exhale is exactly twice as long as your inhale. This 1-to-2 ratio is literally a biological cheat code to heavily stimulate the vagus nerve, melting away anxiety in real time.
If there is one absolute core lesson to take away from this explainer, it's this. Change your physiology and you instantly change your psychology. You cannot argue with a hijacked brain, but you absolutely can physically force it to calm down. This is exactly why top performers, elite athletes, and world-class speakers constantly use these exact breathwork resets before stepping onto a stage or a field. They know that mastering their physical body is the only proven way to master the primitive mammalian brain and unlock their true potential. So the next time you feel that sudden surge of heat in your chest, the next time someone cuts you off in traffic or sends that completely infuriating message, you have a choice. Will you let a tiny almond-shaped watchman override your massive frontal cortex and ruin your relationships, your career, and your peace of mind? Or will you take a deep breath, count backwards, and take back your 13 seconds? The remote control to your brain is in your hands. Use it wisely.